Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the privilege is mine once again to come to the podium to make a contribution on behalf of the people of Dennery North. And every time I come to the podium, Mr. Speaker, I come to give expression to their concerns, their sentiments, their perspectives on issues before the House. And today, Mr. Speaker, the debate is about an extension to the state of emergency that was instituted by the government a few days ago. A customary feature of my presentations, Mr. Speaker, has been me profiting the opportunity to express, of course with your indulgence, get well wishes to constituents who are not well, expressions of condolences to families that have lost loved ones, and congratulate constituents for their achievements between parliamentary intervals. And so with your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, and that of colleagues, I want to wish a friend and a constituent, Gilroy, a speedy recovery. He's at St. Jude Hospital. You know him very well, Mr. Speaker. Sabina of Olio, she too is not well. And my next door neighbor, Jerome, better known as TJ, Mr. Speaker, he too has not been well of late. And I want to profit the opportunity to wish them a speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, when one listens to the members on the other side of the parliamentary divide, you get the impression that we do not have a crisis on our hands and that all is well in St. Lucia and that the government has flawlessly managed the COVID situation. Mr. Speaker, those who came before me on the other side spoke glowingly about the programs of the government and how the country is faring. All is well in paradise, according to the members on the other side. First, Mr. Speaker, to present this morning following the Prime Minister was the member for Choiseul and Minister for Commerce, Consumer Affairs, etc. And he said, Mr. Speaker, that the private sector, by way of their tax commitments to the country or the government, are responsible for paying salaries indirectly, if I were to paraphrase what he said. And he's correct. But Mr. Speaker, can we not advance a case for a balance being struck between that dollar we pursue to keep the country going and salvaging lives and trying to manage the spread of COVID? Mr. Speaker, I have heard some of the most outrageous statements about COVID made here this afternoon. One member went as far as saying that members and surrogates of the St. Lucia Labour Party are prepared to watch people die from COVID in pursuit of a vote. It was said here this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and the same member who made that pronouncement at the previous sitting of Parliament, he accused members on this side of stooping to an all-time low because on a matter of principle, we disagreed, Mr. Speaker, with what the government was advancing and what the government was postulating. The member for Ancillary Canways, Mr. Speaker, and it is not the first time that I have been quoted by the government, and I'm not afraid to be quoted. Because every time I walk through this door, Mr. Speaker, and I enter this chamber, I always come here to make a frank, honest, an objective contribution to the debate irrespective of the subject matter before this Parliament. When it was brought to my attention sometime last year that people were infiltrating the borders, porous as they are, of this country, and that they possibly were coming through the Louvet Beach and other secluded beaches, Mr. Speaker, I came into the parliament. I went on social media and I said to my constituents and by extension, the people of St. Lucia who knew about it, that everybody should play a role to ensure that the perpetrators desist from doing so, because they are putting not just themselves and their families, but an entire community and country at risk. And if today I have to come in this chamber again and denounce people infiltrating the borders of this country illegally, Mr. Speaker, I will do it. But what I will not appreciate is for people to quote me conveniently and out of context because they want to look good and they want me to give credence to some of the failed programs and policies that they have implemented. Mr. Speaker, we heard recently, last week, the minister responsible for health in this country. She is worthy of being quoted. What did she say? She said that in spite of all the glowing reviews from the government, that the government has dropped the ball. What do we mean by that figure of speech, to drop the ball? It means in lay language that you have not done what you were supposed to do, or you have fumbled, or, Mr. Speaker, you have erroneously gone about certain things that you perhaps intended to do. And she is saying to us that the situation that we now face in this country as it relates to COVID, we find ourselves here today because the government has dropped the ball. Those are not my words. The government's chief policy maker on health, she didn't say that to me in private quarters or in a casual conversation. She was speaking to the nation. And whereas, Mr. Speaker, in jest, people were saying they had not seen the minister came out and she was very forthright in her pronouncement that we had dropped the ball as a country. So let us not make it seem as if the government's inability to deal with the situation that exists today is as a result of the posture assumed by the opposition. We have said before that we have a vested interest in the well-being of the people of this country, and no amount of criticism, disparaging as they may be at times, will prevent me and colleagues on this side to assume a responsible position as it relates to the management of COVID. And it was the member for Castries South East who made the point that when he goes out, he has people in his family who have pre-existing conditions. It's not a secret, Mr. Speaker, that I live with my mother, who has attained her biblical allotment of free scores and much more than that. So even when I venture out providing leadership to the people of Denrinoff, I have to be very circumspect, because, Mr. Speaker, I will be mortified to know that I went out there in constituency encouraging people to wear their mask. I do it, but I have to tread very cautiously, because I wouldn't want the day to come to know that I took COVID off the streets of Denrinoff and brought it into the household that I share with my mother, as I said, who has attained the biblical allotment of free scores and 10. So how can you come here and make people believe that we are prepared to celebrate or see people die from COVID in pursuit of a vote? That is low, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, let me interject here. I didn't want to do it earlier. But the member never accused the 6 members on the opposite side of wanting to see people die. He said the Labour Party. I try to be very careful. How do I interfere with members' speech? He said that the members opposite of the Labour Party, that I would take that a totally different way. I'm just trying to guide you, so proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so guided, but I do not understand how people who are agents of the Labour Party would want to see prospective voters die as they pursue votes on behalf of the Labour Party. But if that is your guidance, Mr. Speaker, I yield. Mr. Speaker, we were accused of attacking frontline workers and public servants. The Prime Minister, in presenting this morning, Mr. Speaker, he spoke about how stretched the men and women of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force have been ever since the COVID battle started. And he's right. He's correct, Mr. Speaker. But when did the St. Lucia Labour Party, whether the members in this parliament or its surrogates, attack law enforcement personnel in this country in their fight against COVID? The biggest attack or the worst attack that has been launched on the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, Mr. Speaker, came last week when the government said to the people of St. Lucia that out of all the gazetted rank and file police officers we have in this country, not one is qualified to assume the reins of commissioner. Do you know how demotivating that can be for the gazetted officers of this country, Mr. Speaker? And then we talk about empathy. Of course they've been stretched. Of course they make sacrifices, as do the nurses, the fire officers, the correctional officers. They all make sacrifices. And we have to commend them for the sacrifices that they make. But don't come here and accuse the St. Lucia Labour Party of attacking public servants when you can speak so disparagingly about the High Command of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. Mr. Speaker, the United Workers' Party administration has failed at the management of COVID. They may have started off well, but somewhere along the line, they lost the plot. And then they are ascribing the spike in the COVID numbers to a protest rally organized and held by the St. Lucia Labour Party. So when there is a spike in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it is the St. Lucia Labour Party that took our boats and went to St. Vincent to march. When there is a spike in Barbados, are you going to hold the St. Lucia Labour Party responsible for the spike in Barbados and Grenada and the UK and the US? We have been told by the science that this virus moves in waves. In waves, Mr. Speaker. So how can you, in your good conscience, ascribe blame to the St. Lucia Labour Party in relation to a spike in the COVID numbers? At times, they tell you COVID has to be attacked on all fronts. And COVID, there must be a united approach to fighting COVID. We have alluded to that on this side, and we believe that, Mr. Speaker. But the COVID has been so politicized, that some of the challenges that we are facing today have everything to do with the infiltration of the petty partisan politics that underlie and underscore building the new St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, you heard an attack was launched on the leadership of the St. Lucia Labour Party. And a member said that the St. Lucia Labour Party subscribes to Susu leadership. Let me place on the record, Mr. Speaker, that the 6 members on this side, or the 5 of us, are united in our stance and support for the member for Castries East and leader of the opposition. There is absolutely no leadership struggle in the St. Lucia Labour Party. And so, Mr. Speaker, that particular pronouncement has to be emphatically denounced. Mr. Speaker, the state of emergency, as we know it, the government is proposing to extend by 90 days from the 11th of February 2021 to the 16th of May 2021. Gouvernement qui a venu ici à Odia, et qui a dit nous, that quand nous n'y ça en anglais, on a créé un state of emergency pour 7 jours, Mr. Speaker. Ça pas ni assez pour aider le gouvernement à contrôler COVID-19. Ce gouvernement a besoin en l'autre 90 jours, 90 days, pour y amener la situation ça à la manière que ça contrôle le virus là. Mr. Speaker, there are some inconsistencies in the approach. And I understand the constant need. And it's probably not an easy decision to make. You go after that dollar to keep your economy running. You go after that dollar because you want to pay public servants. You go after that dollar because you want to enhance your road program because elections are around the corner. I understand the temptation to do that, Mr. Speaker. But that should never be at the expense of saving and salvaging lives. Livelihoods cannot be more important than lives. Cannot be, Mr. Speaker. And the government has not demonstrated enough sensitivity where that is concerned. I know it's not an easy decision for you to make. Every month you have to crunch figures to pay salaries. But there's going to come a time in the life of a country where you have to take hard decisions. But you can only do that, Mr. Speaker, when you have the confidence of the people. That you're going to come and take a decision, as unpopular as it may seem to be, at the outset, Mr. Speaker, people will be inclined to follow you. But nobody listens to this government anymore. Nobody listens to the government anymore. And so the situation continues to spiral out of control. So we have a curfew. And the member said it. It was also the member for Castries East who alluded to the fact that you can only have a curfew under a state of emergency. But here what happens, Mr. Speaker. And these are some of the stories that are related to me by my constituents. You leave your home in Denver North. You board a bus. You mingle with fellow constituents on the bus. You go into the city. You mingle with people from other constituencies. You go into a workplace, whether it's a government department, a private sector entity, a call center, a hotel. You interface with people there, Mr. Speaker, and you heard the member cited an example this morning at the call centers where you are asked to remove your mask and you're working in proximity of people from other constituencies. You don't know if they're contaminated or not. Then you board a bus and you go back to your home. How are the people at home protected? How do we ensure that on the bus, walking through the streets of Castries, at the hotel, the call center, the private sector agent entity that you work at, that you're not exposed and bringing or taking that virus or transferring it from your workplace to the bus into the community? How do we ensure that, Mr. Speaker? And contrary to what they may want to think on the other side, we are not happy about COVID. We are not happy about COVID. Has anybody profiled the 20 people who have died in this country to determine which political party they support? You think COVID is concerned about that? It's only 20, some people say, because out of the 20, none have been from our families. So we can come here and posture and tell ourselves that we're doing well when the figures continue to spiral out of control. When all the data analysis and comparison is being done and placed on social media to tell us that we are the worst in the Caribbean. But no, we're doing well. So when the member from Ancillary comes and he tells you that we are doing the best, the people of Montciso and Mondor in his constituency and Anslavede, things are not hard for them because the government is managing. We have to come to terms with the reality that confronts us, Mr. Speaker. The government alone does not have the capacity to fight COVID. The government cannot fight COVID on its own. There is a role for the opposition. There is a role for civil society organizations. There is a role for teachers, even when they instruct our children virtually. There is a role for the church. And if at all, Mr. Speaker, our country has been confronted by a situation that gives credence to the theme, independence theme of yesteryear, is now. It has to be a case of all in. But it can't be all in when parliamentary representatives on the opposition side who continue to lead the charge, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of their constituents are denied resources. I know what it's like to pay for a town crier to go through my constituency to ask people to observe the protocols. At every opportunity, I've sung the praises of the Richmond police for what they've been trying to do to help the situation. But we're all in. We're building a new St. Lucia. And this morning the Prime Minister asked the question, how far have we come as a country? When you go to deny deliberately opposition parliamentarian resources to make a contribution to the fight against COVID, and instead of realizing, okay, that these are different times, we've never been there before. How many times have we been told in this house that these are uncharted waters for us? How many times must we underscore that the problems of COVID are twofold? There's an economic component and then there's a health issue, Mr. Speaker. All of those things have been said here in glowing terms. But yet, I cannot go to January enough. And you heard the leader of the opposition this morning, you know. He had to call the CMO himself to ask for a box of masks. And then we're serious about building a new St. Lucia. Of course we are resilient people. Of course St. Lucians are by their nature resilient people. And I believe we have the capacity to overcome the situation that confronts us today, Mr. Speaker. We are the worst in the Caribbean as we speak. This is not something for anybody to celebrate. Anybody who's a patriot and who loves this country can never find comfort and solace in watching the figures spiral out of control. And contrary to what has been insinuated from the other side, Mr. Speaker, we are saddened by what we see. And we want better for our country. I want better for the bus drivers of January North, who have had to carry, Mr. Speaker, 7, 8 people in a 14-seater bus to Castries. But they continue to soldier on. And I believe I have a responsibility to go to them and tell them, just hold strain. Just hold strain, hoping that our country will emerge out of this. But the member said from Castries South, you know how much pressure I get as an MP when people tell you that they can't even pay the light bill this month, but everywhere they turn, they see the millions of dollars being spent on roads. And the member for Ancillary told you that the roads are necessary to keep people employed. I'm not against roads. I have a lot of road needs in my constituency. But Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that we need to strike a balance. Government sets the tone. Government sets the pace. Government is the example that people will turn to in periods of crisis. And government cannot be a collective of people who want their seats in the majority and go to cabinet every week. If there is one time government has to be more than just the cabinet, it's now, Mr. Speaker, where we are given a fair and equal opportunity to make a contribution in that fight to salvage our country. There are certain decisions we don't always want to take on our own. We're not going to shut down the borders. But our source markets are saying to their citizens and the airlines that operate from their country that you cannot fly to St. Lucia and the Caribbean. They have to do it for us. And I said, I understand. You have salaries to pay. You want to keep the wheels of government in motion. And then you have one eye on that tourist dollar. And you have the other eye on the health of a nation. And we are saying, Mr. Speaker, there may be moments in this fight when we have to see, hold back on the dollar, and let us bring this curve down. Let us begin, Mr. Speaker, to show that lives matter in this country. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition presented 7 thematic areas under which he believed we should approach the fight against COVID in this country. His recommendations, they were a source of ridicule this afternoon. And as disrespectful as it was, you saw what the member for Ancillary attempted to do. The leader of the opposition said this morning that we should immediately expand testing and tracing. If the leader of the opposition, and by extension the members on the other side of the parliamentary divide come here, and we say to the government that we are concerned about the COVID situation, and one of the many things, we're not saying that it is only the 7-point plan that he presents that will bring us all the solutions that we want, but we're saying at least consider those. And if he comes and says that we should immediately expand testing and tracing, Mr. Speaker, you think this is something that a member should try and ridicule? Mr. Speaker, if the leader of the opposition comes here and he says that we should immediately expand the treatment program, isn't there merit in such a recommendation? Is that something that should be ridiculed? Mr. Speaker, he also said that we should rethink travel and tourism measures. But if we're not doing it for ourselves, the source markets will do it for us. And I just alluded to that a few seconds ago. Mr. Speaker, he said that we should revise the partial shutdown. He did not come here and say, just shut down the country because he has some kind of sinister motive or objective to give him political advantage. The same way the member for Castries Southeast will tell you that when he sits in the cabinet room, he tries to distance himself and he tries to wear his mask. I know of nobody on the political landscape in St. Lucia who is a stickler for the protocols to be observed than the member for Castries East and leader of the opposition. So when the member comes here, I know that he's speaking from the heart. I know his contribution is laced with objectivity and concern for the people of not just his constituency, but St. Lucians, Mr. Speaker, across the length and breadth of this country. He also recommended protection of our education sector. Our children are vulnerable. The teachers are vulnerable. I spent 17 years in a classroom before I entered the political arena, Mr. Speaker. I taught at both the primary and the secondary level. And I can tell you that it will be a challenge to keep our children in check. But we have to try. Our children, we have to make them understand that these are uncharted waters, as I said. We've not been there before. And so even the little ones have to make sacrifices. But let us bring stakeholders to the table. When the St. Lucia Teachers Union comes and they make recommendations in relation to how we should go about school in this COVID environment, Mr. Speaker, we have to listen. We have to look to work collaboratively with them. COVID affects everybody. They must have a voice. The government alone, as I've said before, cannot successfully challenge and win over COVID. He also recommended, Mr. Speaker, or he made a point in relation to vaccination. The vaccine will be here. You heard a member on the other side, I can't recall whether it was the member for Ancillary or the member from Castries East, who spoke about the vaccine will be provided to St. Lucians free of charge. Did the government pay for the vaccines, or will the government be paying for the vaccines that we will be receiving as a country? My research tells me that the vaccines will be donated to St. Lucia. So don't give the impression that you're spending money on vaccines. You're spending money on vaccines and you'll give it to St. Lucians free of charge. A comme si c'est un cadeau au cabaye. Ça c'est même gouvernement, Mr. Speaker. A bas conduite yo. Nous ayons 112 millions de dollars tapé servi pour bâtir en facilité pour cheval faire course. En bas d'idio. Yo qui était un gouvernement. Yo côté d'où qui ça qui fait les bas partis un gouvernement. C'est pas nous qui était un gouvernement, Mr. Speaker. C'est pas nous. The member spoke about compassion and he said that we are not for the poor and that the coconut vendor in his constituency, moun nan ki ka vendre coco, et qui pour vendre et puis il vendre coco, 200 coco pour une journée. I pasa fere pay pour moun sa evan cocoa. I have coconut vendors in my constituency as well. And I'm always happy to know, Mr. Speaker, that when they cross the Badlil in those 4x4 vans, some of which sometimes I marvel at how they're able to traverse the Badlil and back, but they still go out there to try and earn a livelihood for themselves and their families, Mr. Speaker. I would want to see them get a form of income. But don't tell me that the St. Lucia Labour Party is a heartless organization, because as far as you're concerned, or your interpretation is that we do not want to see poor people and people who cannot fend for themselves make a little income, Mr. Speaker, to feed their family. You are the one who closed the Fish Marketing Corporation. If you are going to be a champion and an advocate for poor people, you have to be consistent. The same consistency that the member for Castries South East had an issue with. You said we were not consistent, but today you are coming into this parliament in a COVID debate to be a champion of coconut vendors, but you will close the Fish Marketing Corporation so that the fishers who go out at sea from 4 in the morning will be all over the place at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, trying to sell their fish. These days, with curfew, I don't know what they're going to do with it, Mr. Speaker, the catch. At 7 o'clock, if you are found with your fish traversing the different inner communities to get a sale, you run the risk of being confronted by the police. And the 600 or 700 arrests we've had in relation to COVID violation, you might very well be a statistic, Mr. Speaker, to cause that to trend upward. So let us be consistent. Yes, there's a consistency issue here. But it's not on our side, it's on your side. Mr. Speaker, I believe, as has been said here today, that we are a resilient people and we can overcome. I believe St. Lucia can get the better of COVID. I believe everybody in here, irrespective of which side you are on, there must be a constituent, and even more importantly, a family member who is susceptible to what COVID can do, as we've seen in other parts of the world, and to a lesser extent, even here in St. Lucia. COVID is everybody's business, Mr. Speaker. There must be a place at the discussion table for the St. Lucia Medical and Dental Association. There must be a seat at that table for the trade unions. All sectors, Mr. Speaker, must be given a voice. But when you come here and you want to make people believe, gouvernement ça a fait mon quoi, that toute démarche yo apprend pour gommer COVID, j'ai travail. Là nous tenons ministre qui a une responsabilité pour santé même venir qui dit nous. Il va tout translate. That gouvernement pour faire tout ça ici posé faire et bien faire de manière qui était droite et bien qui était correcte. Et ça c'est raison pour qui nous n'avons autant cas COVID en ce pays cette lycée. Mr. Speaker, as I said, the government sets the tone and the rest of the population follow. We have to be very careful what signals we send. If it is that we want to tell St. Lucians that things are okay, the government is doing well, we are the best managers of the economy, and we put in money in people's pockets, then stick to that script, to the detriment of this country. Or are you going to be man enough to come and say, look, we tried some measures. They may have worked at the initial stages of the fight. But as the health minister said, we dropped the ball somewhere along the way. And the time has come for us to re-examine our approach to this COVID fight. The opposition stands ready, Mr. Speaker, united under the leadership of the member for Castries East, to play our part. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me to make a contribution on this motion and not add my voice to that of those persons who would have thanked the frontline workers. There was a big charade about nurses and doctors 3 months into COVID. And in typical St. Lucian fashion, nurses and doctors and other frontline workers have been pushed aside. Is it because of our preoccupation with the upcoming general elections that we've forgotten them. And so today, on behalf of the people of Dennery North, I want to register our collective thanks to the nurses and doctors, the fire personnel, the correction officers, utility workers, Mr. Speaker, and yes, the men and women of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force, who continue to work hard, who continue to soldier on, Mr. Speaker. And some have been broken in recent times because they know that consistently they go beyond the call of duty to discharge their functions and their responsibilities to the people of this country, and have once again been bypassed for promotion. But I've said to them, do not allow that to break your resolve. I've also said to some of them that you do not always define yourself as a police officer with the stripes. And I've also said to them, Mr. Speaker, that this is only for a time. I want to also take the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people of Dennery North, to thank the management of the Richmond Police and by extension, the wider Dennery Policing District. The Assistant Superintendent of Police, Shawn Alexander, and Sergeant Gustav, for trying to encourage people to follow the protocols. It's the former Commissioner of Police, Osbert Regis, who said that we cannot arrest our way through COVID. And from day one, the opposition has been making a point. We've been advancing a case for moral suasion. We must continue to educate people. We must continue to work with our people. The answer cannot always be, Mr. Speaker, to pull out the handcuffs. People are restless. People are frustrated. There are people who have lost their jobs. There are banana farmers who have not sold since last year. You want me to say why? Not today. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you don't. Like you always say, don't go there. Mr. Speaker, the situation is grim for a lot of people. But we have a responsibility to say to those persons whose situations have worsened as a result of COVID to hold strain. We will never exploit a crisis in our country to score political points. Look at social media. See who's out campaigning. Who's doing the campaigning? Not us. Not us. We are not the ones campaigning. They are the ones campaigning, Mr. Speaker. And you have brought on an extension of the state of emergency, not just to fight COVID, but to give yourself an advantage ahead of the upcoming general elections. Magadi, Mr. Speaker, through you, Magadi Mam Parliament Pusufuye bi tout moun ici. That gouvernement vini epi sa ka créer extension of state of emergency. Pas seulement pour abattre et pour try contrôler situation COVID, mais pour bay koyo en l'avantage. Yo do nuit konjou, Mr. Speaker, ka campagne pour bay koyo en l'avantage devant élection. Et magadi yo bay yo ça pousse date là de pousse de même comme moun qui ka back yo ka back et la ni en goal there, Mr. Speaker. Là ka vinn yo pa back encore. And the people of St. Lucia will be the ones to pronounce on who are the better managers, who can do what is necessary to get our country out of this situation. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for your indulgence. I want to reiterate that we are a resilient people and we can overcome. I want to say that the government must understand that it sets the tone in this country. And notwithstanding, elections are on the horizon. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the situation is not beyond us as a people. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage not just my constituents, but to just at least to observe the protocols. Let us work with the people who are charged with the responsibilities of putting the protocols together. Mr. Speaker, let us work with the CMO and her office. Let us work with all those persons in our constituencies and the community-based organizations that have a vested interest and are committed to seeing St. Lucia get to the bottom of this COVID problem. It affects all of us. All of us, Mr. Speaker. This is my submission and contribution to the debate on the motion before the House. I thank you.